Hey, hey, it's an Amber a day. Should I start my podcast like that? Probably not. Hi, guys. How are you? Great to talk with you again. I'm very excited about today's podcast. We're going to talk about the real, true, nuanced answer of whether you need to go gluten and dairy free for PCOS. We're going to talk about why people talk about it as if it's something that you absolutely need to do, and why people talk about it as if it's absolutely something that you don't need to do. And spoiler alert, a lot of it comes from people trying to go viral on the internet, which I know a little something about, just a little something. So I'm going to talk to you about what really is the truth behind this issue. And as with most things, there's a lot of gray area, but I want you to understand that gray area because you need to know if you are the type of person who would actually benefit from the whole gluten dairy free thing, or the type of person who the benefits do not outweigh the negatives. Positives don't outweigh the negatives. You know what I mean. Okay, but before we get into that, real quick, I just want to do a little reminder to let you guys know again that I am enrolling for my group program right now, my PCOS group program. It's called the Functional PCOS Group Program. And if you're thinking, don't you have a course called Functional PCOS? Yes, I do. So the Functional PCOS Group Program was originally based on that course. What I did was over the course of a couple of years, actually, I wrote down basically everything I know about PCOS and put it into a pretty organized format, created a course on it, and felt like the course was really awesome, but it really was missing that one-to-one interaction, that ability for me to actually talk to you and explain even further what I mean by different things. And so my fellow nutrition friend, fellow PCOS person, Hannah of the Conscious Nutritionist, and I decided to team up and make it into a group program. So we added a lot to it. And we have been running it. This will be our third cohort. So we've made a lot of changes over the last two cohorts based on the feedback given to us by students, just to make sure that it's really full of the information that you guys actually need and want. Because, sometimes as practitioners, we get a little bit in our head, and we've been doing this for a long time. So like for me, I love nothing more than like diving into the minutia of like the biochemistry of different nutrients and stuff. But I know that that's not always necessarily what you want to hear. Sometimes you just want to hear like, okay, this is what you need to do, and this is why it's going to help, and et cetera, et cetera. But the whole point of the group program is it's kind of like a college course in PCOS. That's how I've been describing it lately, because you go through 12 weeks of live classes, essentially. Hannah and I both take turns teaching different topics. We go over everything from root causes of PCOS, like really down a lot deeper than what you see from me on social media or even here on this podcast. We go into the root causes, helping you figure out what yours are, supplements, labs, gut health, food sensitivities, endocrine disruptors, like you name it, we go over it. We have like a couple of cool guests come in to do stress reduction topics where they actually teach you how to do actual evidence-based things that will help with your adrenals and your stress. Fertility is covered as well, if that's something that you're going through. But it's not specifically, we do cover weight loss, but it's not specifically weight loss or specifically fertility focused. So I think it's great for anybody with PCOS, whether newly diagnosed or if you've been dealing with PCOS for a long time. The other cool thing about it is that we've modified it over the last couple of cohorts to include one-on-one support. So there's always been a group chat function where everybody gets to know each other and can ask questions at any time on our group chat, but there is now the one-on-one sessions with Hannah and myself are rolled into the price of the program. So you get two one-on-one sessions, one with me, one with her, where we go into a lot more depth on your specific PCOS and help you parse through the information that you're learning. You learn a ton. And so it can be a little overwhelming during those 12 weeks, right? But you have access to all the information of the courses for the year to come. you have access to asking us questions and all things like that. So it's a very good value. It's probably the best way to combine the aspect of like, if you really want to learn a lot about PCOS, you're kind of interested in your body and understanding how it's working, and getting that one-on-one support. And it's a lot more budget friendly than working one-on-one with me, as you know, if you've ever looked into it, unfortunately. So I highly, highly recommend it if it's something that is feasible for you. I know that a group program like that is not budget friendly for everybody, but we jam pack it. I know it's a great value. What you're getting is definitely a great value for what you're paying. And I would love to see some of you guys there. If you're interested in learning more about what is included in the group program and all that kind of stuff, I will link in the description box the information on, the little page where you can see everything that's included, all the modules and all that stuff. And I also do have a special discount for podcast listeners. If you enter code podcast150 at checkout, then you will get $150 off just for being great, just for being one of my podcast people. So thank you for being here. I think that's all I have to say on that. Oh, I do want to remind you, because this podcast I think is coming out in mid-April. So the course starts the week of April 23rd. So you might be cutting it pretty close. Hopefully there are still spots left when this is released. But definitely if you have questions and things like that, there is a podcast I did last week with Hannah where we go over some of our common questions. You can also reach out to me via email, and I'm happy to answer any questions if we still probably will have some space left. So if we do, and you reach out, I'll kind of let you know, I'll answer your questions and everything. Sessions are on Thursday nights at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, but if you cannot attend live because you live in a different time zone, that is totally okay. We record every session and it's up by the next morning. So you're able to watch the replays and you still get the opportunity to ask questions that we can then answer live in the next session. So let's say that we went over something last week that you weren't able to be there for, and it sparked a question for you about your particular situation. You can ask the question and we will answer it either then, or we'll answer it during the next session, something like that. So again, it's a lot of support. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about gluten and dairy free for PCOS. I was surprised. I actually scrolled back on Buzzsprout, which is where I have my podcast hosted. And I scrolled back and I was like, surely I've talked about this before. And I know that in some of my like maybe inflammation and gut health episodes, I probably have sort of mentioned some of this gluten and dairy free stuff before, but I will have a podcast specifically dedicated to this topic, although it is a topic that I find that there is a lot of confusion on. I get asked questions about this fairly frequently, but also I just see a lot of people that are confused. Like sometimes I will post videos of something, or I'll like say I'm eating bread or whatever, and people are like, but I thought you were supposed to be gluten-free with PCOS. I also get a similar question about matcha. People are always like, oh, I thought you weren't supposed to drink caffeine with PCOS. And so this gets me on a little bit of my soapbox, because number one, I mean, there is a nuanced answer to this whole thing that we're going to get into. But number two, you have to understand that when you are getting information online, primarily, and you're not currently or not able to work one-on-one with somebody, what you're getting is a lot of good information. It's true, there is a lot of good information out there now that was not there like back when I was diagnosed, I love that. I'm actually very excited about that. And that's one of the reasons I even got on social media in the first place, even though I can be painfully shy, which you maybe don't believe. But trust me, if you go scroll back on my Instagram and see some of the stuff that I was putting out way back when I first started this, like it was painful, literally painful to be on my stories with my face. But anyway, it's one of the things that made me excited about getting into the nutrition sphere for PCOS and putting out the content that I have, because I think that I have something unique to say, because there's a lot of good stuff out there. But what you will find, as I'm sure you have, is that a lot of it's conflicting. And so it's like, well, why is it conflicting? You know, are people lying to me? Are people just trying to sell me stuff? I think that's the complaint that I get the most frequently is like, everybody's trying to sell a course, everybody's trying to sell me something. And, you know, fair enough. Like, it's true. Every person who does social media as a major part of their work is going to have some way to monetize their content. So I know I'm getting off on a rabbit trail, but we make a lot of things. I make a lot of things that are free, like this podcast, I think is a great resource. I have a blog. I do all my Instagram posts. I make TikTok videos, all that kind of stuff. I try to do as much as I can for free. But at the end of the day, like, we all have families to support too. And since we spend so much time on the social media stuff, it does take away time that we're able to work one-on-one with people. So typically people who are in my position will be doing either half and half, where they're working part-time with clients and they're part-time doing social media. That's kind of what I do, or they're full-time social media. And so the way that they monetize their accounts is by selling, you know, different things. So they can either take brand deals where they promote rando supplements, which I get asked about literally daily. I have an email from somebody saying, will you promote this PCOS supplement? And I won't do that. So we can do that kind of stuff, or we can create educational material that's maybe a little bit more in depth, or that we want to monetize. So I think a lot of people have a good heart about it and don't intend to be salesy and whatever, but it's just like, at the end of the day, we got to eat too, and we have something to share, and this is our skill. And so we are trying to find a way to be paid for our skill and actually provide something of a deeper value that's behind a paywall without also being like, oh, you can't learn anything from me unless you buy my course. So it's a hard balance to walk. But I think because of that, that's one reason why a lot of the information that you see online about PCOS is very conflicting, because the way that social media works as a creator, and I promise I'm not going to talk about this the whole time. Okay. I know you're probably like, I don't really care what creators are doing, but you have to understand this to kind of understand the whole gluten and dairy free thing. So bear with me. So the way that social media works as a creator is that if you are making content that is nuanced, that is, has pros and cons, that where you're like holding two things up and you're comparing them, if it's too long, if it's more than a minute long, specifically, and if it's not filmed beautifully or if it's not controversial, then it doesn't tend to reach as many people. And so content creators for PCOS have very few topics that they can be controversial about, because at the end of the day, we know a lot about what is helpful for PCOS diet-wise. Like, you probably see everybody talking about protein. Everybody's talking about, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people are talking about fiber. A lot of people are talking about whole foods. Like, these are things that nobody, I think, really disagrees on for the most part, at least in the licensed nutrition sphere. So the thing that is controversial, though, is gluten and dairy, because there are some bigger accounts that are very pro cutting out gluten and dairy. And then there are some bigger accounts that are very against cutting out any foods or restriction of any kind. So this is where a lot of these creators, I think, they get the rest of their message out by creating sort of inflammatory content around this one topic or several topics, right? They have a few things, but you don't have to cut out anything with PCOS sort of topic is like a really popular one to make content about, because it gets people riled up. You've got the people who are like, yes, you do have to cut out gluten and dairy. And you've got the people who are like, yeah, like, no, you don't. And I'll never do that, or I did that and it didn't help me. And so it creates a lot of conversation, and that increases engagement. That's what the algorithms like. And, for good or ill, right? Like, I think there are a lot of societal problems that we actually have based on the fact that our algorithms respond to inflammatory messaging, respond to controversy. Things get a little hateful online, right? Even in the PCOS nutrition sphere, like one place where it should be like, okay, why are people getting heated here? But it does, like, it does get heated. If you've ever seen any of those posts, you'll know that. Sometimes I just like, my popcorn and scroll through the comments because I'm like, oh man. So that's an element to it, right? So people respond to niching, and people respond to very specific content that's controversial. And so the issue is that some people do benefit from going gluten and dairy free with PCOS. And I'll explain why as we move along here. And then some people it makes absolutely no difference for and can actually be harmful. And I'll explain why that too. So you've got these two groups of people with real lived experience where they are actually like, this is their life and they have experienced this firsthand through their own body. So this is their truth and they're sharing their truth, but their truth is at odds with somebody else's truth. And so then you get into a lot of finger pointing and like, is this person trying to sell me something? Is this person trying to lie to me? Can I trust them? Can I not trust them? All that kind of stuff. So why is it that some people have this amazing experience when they go gluten and dairy free, and some people have, it makes no difference to them, or it's actually harmful for them? So there's two reasons why it might help you to go gluten and dairy free. Let's talk about the first one first. And this is probably the most common one you hear as an argument against going gluten and dairy free. So this would be that the average person who's just starting nutrition for PCOS is probably coming from a place where they're eating a standard American diet. And that's going to be a diet that's heavy in processed carbohydrates, processed foods, packaged foods, fast food, lots of carbs, lots of starch, all that kind of stuff. Lots of cheese on everything, you know. I mean, think about like the average thing you'd order at like a fast food place, right? So the macronutrient, the micronutrient composition of those types of foods, that's what a lot of Americans are eating, or a lot of people who live in Western societies. But America, of course, is where I live, and that's where we do it up big, guys. We always have to go above and beyond with a processed food conversation. Although it's a prevalent issue in a lot of Western countries. Anyway, so if you're coming from eating that type of diet and you switch to gluten and dairy free, what's going to happen is, by extension, you are going to cut out a lot of those foods, because guess what? Everything that's fried is going to probably be fried with some sort of batter, and that batter is probably going to be made with gluten and dairy ingredients. The exception being maybe French fries, right? So you're going to be removing a lot of dairy just by removing packaged foods. You're going to be removing a lot of gluten by removing a lot of fast food, a lot of packaged foods as well. And in order to do that, you have to eat something, right? So people end up eating more whole foods. They eat more fruits and vegetables. They eat more foods cooked at home, which is a big deal with the oils and things and stuff. So a lot of positive changes happen in the diet when gluten and dairy is cut out for the average person. Now, of course, there's a way to take that into a negative direction, because now there are a lot of gluten-free, dairy-free products that are also packaged foods and are marketed as health foods, and maybe are not necessarily health foods for somebody with PCOS. Maybe they're high sugar or what have you. So there's that, and I understand that argument too. But for the most part, somebody who's first going gluten and dairy free, they're going to be so overwhelmed with just removing those things and making those diet changes that they're going to eat a much more simple diet with more foods cooked at home. What that's going to do is that's going to balance their blood sugar better. They're going to end up eating more meat and more fruits and veggies, so more fiber, and their blood sugar is going to stabilize more and become more steady. And that, by extension, is going to lower their testosterone, because their insulin's going to be lower, and you know how it goes. Like, it goes down the cascade, right? So if testosterone's lower, we have fewer PCOS symptoms, yada, yada, yada. So there is a subset of people who are going to experience benefits from going gluten and dairy free, not because gluten and dairy were the problem, but because gluten and dairy were just so prevalent in their unhealthy diet before, that now that they're eating their healthy diet, they are eating a lot more whole foods. I see that argument quite a bit online, where that's how people negate the lived experience of somebody who says gluten and dairy free really helped me. And the argument is, well, all you did was, you cut out processed food. And so that's why you feel better. But that's not always the case. That is sometimes the case, but that's not always the case. And I would argue that that's not even normally the case when somebody feels a lot better going gluten and dairy free. Now, what are some arguments against going gluten and dairy free? If your only issue with your PCOS is blood sugar, or that's your main issue, then it's usually advisable to start working on that first, because that's kind of foundational, right? We need to have pretty balanced blood sugar. And sometimes that's enough to really improve our symptoms. Sometimes just eating more whole foods, eating more fiber, eating more protein, all those kinds of things can help symptoms enough that, like, some people get their period back just doing that, right? Those people are probably, I would say, more the exception to the rule than the rule, but all of that stuff can really improve your symptoms a lot. And you don't necessarily need to go gluten and dairy free to do it. You need to switch more to whole fat dairy, right? You need to eat more whole grains instead of processed grains. And you can do that while still including gluten and dairy in your diet. Another reason, a big reason why you want to be careful about removing any food group from your diet is if you are not thoughtful about it, it could result potentially in some nutrient deficiencies down the road, especially if it's stuck to for a long period of time. Also, a lot of folks with PCOS have histories of disordered eating, binge eating, things like that. And so removal of any food group or too much restriction can be very triggering for people who have not had the chance to work through that yet. And if that's you, but you feel like this next group that I'm talking about also sounds like you, then you may want to seek out therapy support if this is something that you feel you need to do. Okay, so let's talk about why gluten and dairy free actually is helpful for a lot of people with PCOS, and what it really means, and why it's not the full answer. So with PCOS, we often have an inflammatory component to this issue. So, one of the PCOS root causes is inflammation, right? But most folks with PCOS, whether that's their true root cause or not, are going to have some level of inflammation in their system. Now, if inflammation is a big deal for you, it seems to be you connect with a lot of the symptoms of inflammation, which would be things like gut health issues, digestive problems, whether upper or lower digestive. So you're having reflux, or you're having diarrhea, constipation, right? If you have an autoimmune condition, which is common, more common in PCOS to have an autoimmune condition alongside PCOS. So there's an autoimmune element to your health. If you have endometriosis, if you have a lot of difficulty losing weight, even when you're really good on your carbs and all that stuff. If you feel really foggy a lot, or you have weird symptoms after eating, things like that. So I will probably be sharing a post. I probably already have shared it on Instagram by the time this comes out, about symptoms of inflammatory PCOS. So I highly recommend going and looking at that, so you can see if this better applies to you. So the inflammation component is big because inflammation has a source. And while we don't always know exactly the source, and while yes, the source could be poor diet, like eating a lot of fast food, stuff like that, typically the majority of the people I'm working with are, they're smart enough and they've been down the rabbit hole enough that they know they're not supposed to be, they're not eating pizza every day for all their meals. They're working on this. They're working on eating more healthy food, less processed food, but they're still having issues with that inflammation component. Maybe they're still getting eczema or rosacea or things like that. And this is because often inflammation is connected to gut health. Our gut plays a really big role in our immune health. About 80% of the cells that make up our immune system kind of reside in our gut. And so the immune system and the gut are highly connected. The gut's also really connected to our stress responses, and vice versa, right? There's a huge gut-brain connection. vagus nerve, all that stuff. But what you need to know about PCOS in the gut is that studies have shown that those with PCOS are more likely to have dysbiosis, which is imbalanced gut bacteria. So remember that we have a collection of bacteria that live in our gut, and these bacteria, they play a huge role in our health. In fact, they're probably the most important piece of our health, because they're the center of our immune system. They're partially, determine how we process foods, how we gain weight or don't gain weight. Like they're really, really important. And they manage how we process hormones. So when we have dysbiosis, we are more likely to have an uptick in something called beta-glucuronidase enzymes, which are enzymes that take hormone metabolites. So estrogen, let's say, that we're all done with, hormones that we're all done with, and that we don't need circulating around our system, because remember, with PCOS, we have way too many hormones going around. So we need to get them out. So they take hormones that are ready to get out of your system and kind of repackage them and help your body reabsorb them, essentially. It's a simplified answer, but that's how beta-glucuronidase enzymes kind of work. And so it contributes a lot to PCOS symptoms, because then you've got more hormones in your system and you're already making too many. So it becomes a big issue. So the dysbiosis plays a role there, because that process can be inflammatory. The thing that we know about dysbiosis is that folks who have dysbiosis are far more likely to have things like leaky gut, which is where the junctures between the cells, like the spaces between the cells in your gut, are kind of like, they have like little microscopic tears in them. So you're not able to fully digest your food. And instead, some larger particles are getting into your bloodstream. That's very inflammatory, and your body can create food sensitivities in situations like that. Those with dysbiosis are far more likely to have food allergies, food sensitivities, and things of that nature. And so why does that matter? Well, I think you can see where I'm going here. If we with PCOS have more dysbiosis than the average, if it's very likely that a lot of us have dysbiosis, and if we know that that dysbiosis contributes to food allergies and sensitivities, and we know that that dysbiosis contributes to inflammation, and if we also know that having a food allergy and sensitivity is inflammatory for our system, because it is, it puts our immune system on high alert, and that's inflammatory. If we know all that stuff, then we can make the leap to say that there might be some foods that are common in maybe the standard American diet or what have you, that could be food allergies and sensitivities for those with PCOS, and thereby could be triggering inflammation. And if you've learned anything about inflammation from me in the past, I hope one of the big takeaways that you've had is that high levels of inflammation will cause your ovaries to create more testosterone. So this can happen even if there's no insulin resistance going on. And this is one big reason why I think that inflammatory PCOS does not get enough attention, because I see a lot of people who, I don't think they would be super insulin resistant if they weren't in a constantly stressed state because of the fact that their bodies were inflamed all the time from eating foods that they're allergic or sensitive to. And you can have food sensitivities and food allergies and not have digestive symptoms. And that's an unfortunate part of things, is like that can be going on, especially if you have an autoimmune condition. I see that a lot. But most of the time there's going to be some sort of symptom that you're going to be able to connect. And so oftentimes the symptoms of food allergies and sensitivities that are unaddressed are the same symptoms that we would look at for inflammatory PCOS. I mean, if you go down the list, so many of them can go for either, right? So skin issues, joint pain, autoimmune issues, digestive issues, of course, and stuff like that. So, and plus food sensitivities and dysbiosis and all these kind of things can lead to nutrient deficiencies. And that also can be inflammatory. So there's a lot to it. Now, this matters for gluten and dairy because of one major reason, which is that of all of the most common food allergens, and there are several I'm going to kind of list for you, gluten and dairy are somewhere near the top of the list. They are some of the most common food allergens. So what that means is there are some of the foods that you are more likely to develop a food allergy or sensitivity to. Like if you are prone to developing an allergy sensitivity, you're more likely to develop it to the most common allergens than to other things. You're more likely to have a sensitivity or allergy issue to wheat. Gluten is the protein in wheat, or to dairy proteins. So the sensitivities and allergies are to proteins in the foods, not the sugars in the food, like lactose. You're more likely to have an issue with those things if they are coming from foods that are on the most common allergen list, rather than like something like, oh gosh, I don't know, broccoli. And that I can go on a real spiel about food intolerances, which would be things like lactose intolerance and FODMAP intolerance and things that make it hard for people to digest cruciferous veggies and beans and things like that. That's another issue. But what I'm talking about here, true food allergy, food sensitivities, stuff like that, is usually related to the proteins in foods, and you're more likely to be allergic or sensitive to the proteins in the most common food allergens list. So let's go through that list, right? Let's talk about what some of those are. So gluten and dairy, or wheat and dairy, are some of the top ones. But we've also got eggs. I know, eggs. The staple breakfast of the person trying to be insulin friendly, right? So eggs, soy is a big one, shellfish, and then nuts. There may be some others that I'm forgetting right now, but you can Google that, the most common food allergens. You can find lists of that all over the internet. But my point here is that it's not just about the foods being the most common allergen, but also about the prevalence that they have to your diet. So let's say dairy, for example. If you love dairy, like let's say you love to have a yogurt every day, or you put cheese on everything, or what have you, and you have a sensitivity or an allergy to dairy that you're not aware of, you could be triggering inflammation, which is then contributing to difficulty losing weight, making your insulin resistance worse, making more testosterone in your body, putting your body in a stressed out state, which is harming your adrenal health, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, constantly. And so many people live in a fog who have food allergies and sensitivities and don't even realize it. They don't feel like they're in a fog until they come out of that fog. And then they're like, whoa, I was in a fog. But I would say, if you feel like you have gone down the rabbit hole of you're eating enough protein, you're not eating too many carbs, you're not like your sweet tooth is under control, like you're not binging on chips or cake or whatever, or pasta, you're eating a really balanced diet, and you're still having a lot of fogginess, digestive issues, or some of these other symptoms that we've talked about, it's more than likely, I guess I would say, and this is my personal opinion, right? I think it's more than likely that a food allergy or sensitivity might be at play. And if it's going to be to one thing, it's more likely that it's going to be to gluten and dairy. So, do you need to cut out gluten and dairy for your PCOS? There is no yes or no. There is only maybe. I'm thinking of that Star Wars quote. There is no try or whatever. I don't even know that quote, but I'm just thinking of it. Okay. It's not yes or no. It's a maybe. And you probably know in your gut, while I was talking about all that stuff, like if you're still around this far into the podcast, this is probably resonating with you. Maybe not. But if you felt in your gut when I was talking about all that stuff, yeah, that's me. And I would say definitely if you're having like very regular diarrhea, there's definitely something going on. Then you may be one of those people who benefits from going gluten and dairy free. And of course, there's always the overlap, right? Because we're all different and we all have a unique set of experiences. So there are people with food sensitivities and allergies with PCOS who still tolerate dairy and gluten just fine. I mean, I work with people like that fairly frequently, right? They are sensitive to something else, soy or what have you. And then there's the people who, even though they are sensitive to gluten and dairy, it makes it really difficult because they have unresolved issues around, disordered eating. And so in order to do something like a gluten and dairy-free diet, they would need a lot of external support to make sure that they are doing it because they really need to do it and not because, their brain is looking for another place to restrict. There's a lot of nuance here and a lot of gray areas, and only you know what's best for your body. And I always say this on here, but I want you to trust yourself. If you've tried a lot of stuff and it doesn't seem like it's helping and you're still having a lot of digestive issues, whether or not you're on metformin and you think it's the metformin causing that or what have you, like there may still be something going on. And I think the reason I harp on inflammatory PCOS and gut health so much is just because most of the people that I work with, by the time they get ready to actually work one-on-one with someone like me, which is a big investment, right? They have gone through a lot of different stuff, and none of the typical PCOS advice really works well for them or does much for them. I'm thinking of somebody who was in our group program who she was great about eating her protein, eating her fiber, but when she would eat her fiber, her stomach would just absolutely get torn up. And she was like trying to follow the meal plans exactly because they're supposed to be healthy meal plans for PCOS, and for the vast majority of people they were. But for her, because she had a lot of underlying gut health issues that weren't resolved, it was not the appropriate thing for her. And in fact, it was actually making things worse because it was creating an inflammation. And so her and I did some, we had to delve into that one-on-one. And as soon as we figured out what some of her trigger foods were and removed those from her diet for a time, guess what? Everything started to get better. It started to work more. And when I work with people one-on-one, that's a very common experience, is that they're kind of at their wits' end. And so a lot of these people are inflammatory PCOS people that I'm seeing because they've tried it all. And there's a lot out there that you can try totally for free, and not have to do testing and not have to do this and that for your PCOS. But if you have hit a wall and nothing you're doing is helping, this may be another trail to pursue. So the answer is maybe. I hope for you that you are not one of these people that needs to remove gluten and dairy. And again, like I said, there's an approach to this. I did a video on this the other day because I think I like to share the practitioner mindset, right? So there's an approach to handling health issues. We don't just throw something at everything all at once. It's step by step. Your body's going to function much better, and you're going to have a much easier time making big changes if you follow a step-by-step approach. And so the first step is to clear the air. And that means working on the basics, working on the foundations, getting your protein, trying to eat more whole foods, trying to get your fiber. And once you do all that, like the kind of stuff that I go over in PCOS Foundations, which is like my beginner course, right? Once you get all of that stuff under control and you have a good handle on it, like you have a mastery of it, then you will find that these symptoms that really need a lot of specific attention will be more obvious because they will be at the forefront, because your other symptoms will clear. So like an example of this would be, for this particular circumstance, like let's say that you do master all the basics of PCOS nutrition and you're like, you're doing great, but yet you're still having regular diarrhea. There's still foods that seem to upset your stomach. You still can't eat anything too rich. You still can't drink alcohol without like having a problem. Metformin still tears your stomach up, whatever. So in that case, your digestive issues have come to the forefront because now you're not worried about, like, you're not quite as tired as you were before, and you're not getting weak and shaky between your meals, but you're still having these tummy issues. So this is at the forefront now, and now would be the time to start really addressing them. And so, if you want information about how to address these things, I will say I have some stuff out, like some content out there there's podcast on this topic. There are, of course, my courses go into more depth on these things, and then the group program and working one-on-one, right? Those are options. And if you have the financial capacity to do stuff like that, even if it's not with me, but maybe with working one-on-one with somebody else, that's the best way to address the digestive issues. If it's possible, just because they can be complex, they can be tough to manage on your own. I know that from experience because I had a lot of inflammatory gut issues with my PCOS, and it was very hard to figure out what was going on. So it can be hard on your own. So if you can get help somehow, please get help. But if not, you can, I'm doing a series on inflammatory PCOS right now on Instagram, and I'll probably do some videos on TikTok as well. And then there's also some podcasts on this topic too that I think you would probably find interesting if you scroll back. That would probably help. Anything that says like gut, inflammation, like where I'm going to talk about these topics on there, and you can probably parse together some things that would help you. But I think that's all I really wanted to say on this topic today. I hope it gave you something to think about. And don't forget, if you enjoy the podcast, if you appreciate the content, a good review on Apple Podcasts really helps get the information out to more people. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. I would love to see you on my channel. I am planning, if you don't follow me on YouTube already, I am working currently on some new content specifically for YouTube. It's going to be a little bit longer form content. I'm going to do a little cooking show that I'm very excited about, like a PCOS sort of cooking show situation. And I've got another kind of thing that I'm working on where I'm going to be answering some questions and things like that I get commonly. So subscribe to me there. That will be probably the only place where that content will be. And I would love to see you over there. All right. And thank you for listening today. And I hope you have a great week. Talk to you soon.